Whether it's writing or speaking, veterans more now than ever really want to share their stories, and I say go for it. Nothing can break your spirit, only you can break it, but don't let yourself get in the way of your healing, because there's so much more living to do in this life. We all have bad days, but it doesn't mean it's a bad life.
Storytelling is more than capturing moments. It's a vital bridge to understanding, healing, and connection. Today, we have the privilege of delving into the inspired journey of Amy Forsythe, a dedicated combat correspondent who served nearly 18 years in the U.S. Marine Corps with 5 deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. Transitioning to the U.S. Navy Reserve in 2010, Amy continues her mission as a public affairs officer, where she champions the power of narrative to honor and uplift others. Her book, Heroes Live Here, is a profound tribute to the Camp Pendleton Marines who have served since 9/11, offering readers a heartfelt glimpse into their sacrifices and resilience. Amy's career is not only defined by her service, but by her dedication to sharing stories that resonate and heal, embodying the impact of storytelling in both military life and mental wellness. Amy, I'm honored to have you here on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's great to connect with you.
It really is. I mean, our careers did cross paths apparently back in 2006 in Iraq. And I'm just excited to hear of all the amazing things that you've done and the stories that you've told.
Well, thank you. You know, it has been my life's work is to share the courage it takes to wear a uniform. And you know firsthand, and you've seen it firsthand, just how dedicated our service members are when they're operating, when life and limb is on the line. You've seen that firsthand. And hopefully with my experience in having a camera and ready to tell those stories, it's been of value to our commanders, to our family members, and to the taxpayer. And
that's so true. Telling those stories is really the crux of our conversation today. And as our listeners begin tracking their walk with the Strava app, I'd love to dive right in that because you have extensive experience as a combat correspondent. So what role do you think that storytelling plays in the mental health and healing, especially of our service members?
The number one question I get asked from veterans all the time after I published my own book, Heroes Live Here, a lot of veterans approach me and say, hey, I have a story. I want to write a book too. How did you write your book? Or what should I do to get my story out there? So whether it's writing or speaking or creative arts in some way, veterans more now than ever really want to share their experience and their stories. And I say, go for it. Any means possible. Go talk to kids, go talk to college students, get in front of an audience, whether it's a Rotary or a VFW. Just sharing your experience can be very cathartic and very helpful to sort of go back in time and then pull out the important parts that you think might be interesting to someone else. And I think that does help with the healing or bringing closure or comfort to know that someone else is interested. And there are people out there. The past 3 years have really exceeded all my expectations for writing a book. I get calls all the time for people wanting me to come talk to their group or get invited to be a part of some sort of organization just so that they can hear the stories of my own experience. But I know that people out there, wherever they're from, they'll find the same welcoming spirit in their own communities.
You know, when you're talking about helping teach others how to share their story, I know when I began sharing my story about 13 years ago, it was a hot mess. There was a lot of difficult emotions that I was dealing with, areas that I was afraid to touch on. And then when they did come out, it came out in this seemingly incoherent mess. What tools or how do you think the continuation, because I did continue to share my story, it continued to heal me. I was able to touch on more difficult subjects through the recovery process of dealing with the traumas, especially from the battlefield where I felt like others couldn't necessarily understand and resonate. What advice would you give to somebody that still feels uncomfortable talking about their journey?
Well, I think when people put things in perspective, and whether it's through movies or art or other books or inspiration, stories like you or me, where, you know, the trauma and the disappointment and the loss of fellow service members right before our very eyes, that can leave a sting, and that can leave a mark on the heart, I say, or physically, mentally, emotionally. And so the more you can talk about it, put things in perspective, carry on with life as it was meant to be. And in the movie Saving Private Ryan, where at the end he tells Private Ryan, earn this life. You have been spared. You have been granted the opportunity to go forth and make the most of your life and maximize your own potential. And so for veterans out there who are not sure where their place is, or they're feeling despondent or left behind, there is that way. There's a way to find the light, to go towards the light and maximize their own potential. If they can just reframe and understand and put things in perspective of their service, and our nation going forward needs them to be engaged, show their own potential, because when one veteran succeeds, we all succeed as a military service, or veteran groups, our country as a whole. Is that nothing can break your spirit, only you can break it, but don't let yourself get in the way of your healing, because there's so much more living to do in this life. So when you feel that gratitude of being spared the injuries or the death that was almost inevitable. I mean, going to combat, where we saw so many people who were killed or injured, we have to take that seriously and go move with purpose.
For your career, when I had learned that you were a combat correspondent, and then during our pre-interview discussion, learning that you were telling the stories of the military Iraqi transition teams during the time that I was over there, and it was a very kinetic time in the country in the early 2000s. You're in a position of documenting other stories and dealing with hard stuff. You're hearing hard stories. You're witnessing tragedy. How does sharing and listening to these stories and sharing them affect you personally as a correspondent?
Well, for a time there, during especially that 2006 timeframe in Anbar province, I was out with the troops. I was taking photos, taking video, and they would be so excited to have, a photo or video taken of them, and they would welcome me. They'd come along, come on patrol. Let's go. Let's tell this story, because they knew that what they were doing was making history, or at least they could have something to share or send back home. But then the people that I was taking photos of and interviewing would end up getting killed or injured. And so there was a time where I had footage and I had photos of Marines who were and soldiers who were getting killed. And so there was kind of a running joke. So, okay, let's not let Forsythe go out, because every time she does, someone would get killed. So, but there was no greater honor, or what more could I do, so that the footage and the pictures that I took of troops that were killed, I could at least provide that to their families. And so we did that on several occasions. But in the moment of taking pictures and sharing those stories and being able to communicate back home was a real goal of ours. And so some of those troops I've seen years later, and they said, thank you so much for you interviewed me, and my parents saw it, or my wife saw the article, and it made them very proud, and they still have it clipped on the refrigerator 10 years later or something like that. And so that was just a really big compliment, to know that while what I was doing wasn't necessarily, what people would deem as like combat operations, but it was important at the time, and it even more important now as we reflect and have the imagery and have the documentation to show the courage and the bravery and the sacrifices of the troops that were there at the time. And so it's gold now, because people want to cherish those memories. I get calls all the time and say, oh, we're doing a 20-year reunion, or we're doing someone passed away and we'd love to get the photos that you took on this time. And so, or a documentary company reaches out and says, can we get your video from that time you were in Anbar province in 2006? And so, I didn't know at the time that it would be so valuable later in the future. I just didn't think that far ahead in terms of how important it was. But I did know that what we were doing on the ground and getting as many interviews and documenting it would be helpful later. And so I've always just been an advocate of, even for people who don't believe in the profession of photography or videography on the combat battle, you have to document that to show people in real time, but then also you'll want this later, just like the Iwo Jima photos, just like all the other historical imagery that we have. It can be gold to the family members and then to us as a service to make sure that that's properly documented.
Absolutely. I mean, I didn't discover what combat camera truly was and public affairs in the military side was truly was until late after my military career, when I was looking for a second career in the creative arts space. And when I found out the work that's done from the combat field to garrison commands, we really help tell the military story. We tell our nation's story, because it's not just the military. It's where we've been, where we're going, and the people along the way. But when we're in it, we definitely don't realize the impact that it's having on us, or the impact that it's having on those around us. Is there anything that stands out in your military career that you're just like, I had no clue the impact that my work would have on my life in the future?
Well, I think those individual stories, the moment you tell someone, I want to interview you, I want to share your story, they instantly, it changes their persona. They get a smile on their face, and then they say, me? Really? You want to interview me and my story? So I think that when you engage with someone and you want to interview someone or want to tell their story, they automatically start to take more pride in their work, or they're proud to be a part of the organization. And they're speaking on behalf of not just themselves, but their unit, their platoon, their work, their experiences. And so I think that just the power of being able to connect with, and I've interviewed hundreds, if not thousands of people about their jobs, to ask about their experiences and their expertise. And whether I use it or not as a quote or later, or take a photo of them, whether I use it or not, that engagement makes them feel important and valued, and that someone cares about what they're saying. But the biggest compliment I got was when I had been years later. So back in the day, we used to print a newspaper called the Scout newspaper on Camp Pendleton. And it was a paper that came out every Thursday. It was the hard paper, a full newspaper. And I wrote a story, a feature story. I don't even remember what it was. But years later, this Marine, he had been long retired, but saw me and said, you interviewed me, and my mom clipped that newspaper and put it up on the refrigerator. It was there for like 15 years. And so to me, that said that what we were doing really matters. And so that connection between him and his mom and him and his parents, that not only are they proud of their work, but we were proud of their work to showcase and feature him in the newspaper. They thought that was a big deal. So he was very grateful for the opportunity. And so if we could just I wish every service member could get a story or a feature on them specifically. But in the information space right now, it's so noisy, it's so crowded. How do we break through and reach people to get people to read, to help educate, inform, and entertain them at the same time? And so those storytelling skills have to be sharpened at every possible turn for those military storytellers out there, the uniformed, and then also our civilian cadre of storytellers who play just as an important role in promoting the mission of the unit, the commander's objectives, and how do people excel and fall into that storytelling narrative, how to weave all that together so that people are paying attention to your message.
When you're talking about the changing communication landscape, essentially of we need to learn how to break through the noise more effectively to get the stories out that need to be told versus the clutter that's kind of out there, the stuff that'll detract from the mission, the stuff that'll detract from the individuals. How has that changed over the years since you first became a correspondent in the Marine Corps?
Well, I joined the Marines in 1993. It was very old-fashioned, very vintage. I even learned darkroom techniques of how to process film in the darkroom. So I'm feeling very dated. I went through the Defense Information School, which was a school back then. It was in Indiana. It's since moved to Fort Meade, Maryland, but rivals any journalism school. And I had such a great foundational education there that has really translated into me being able to, if I could just master learning how to use a camera, I could tell these stories. So I worked in radio, in the military, radio, television, print newspaper, community relations, media relations. So, but a really good foundation and understanding. I even went on to work. So I left active duty and I went in and I was a TV reporter for many years on and off through my deployments. And so I translated those skills into a great civilian career. But, now with social media and influencers and content creators, there's a lot of great storytellers out there. So user-generated content, and then people who don't actually work in the communications field who are creating great content that I think that public affairs people can really partner and work together to achieve the same outcomes. You noticing that a lot of influencers out there, military folks that are telling their story of their own service, and it's actually really, really good.
It really is, and where you're stationed at right now, it's a land full of influencers, and I see a lot of content coming out there from veterans that are still telling the military story in an interesting and intriguing way, and a hope that everybody else gets a chance to tell their journey. Have you had a chance to work with any of the people in your area down there at Coronado?
I have. And, there's some emerging opportunities for military and veterans to kind of get together, build a network called Parade Deck. And it's where, military influencers live. It's called Parade Deck. And it's just a kind of an umbrella online platform where these really high number content creators are all inspired by each other. But I'll say that there are a lot in the Navy, of course, in the Marine Corps, all services, people have taken to the social media and just to tell their story where, recruiters got to give them ammo because the recruiting right now is so low. You've got to be able to, recruiters need to leverage those people out there telling their stories to bring in the next generation of service members. The saying, top talent attracts top talent. And so they may not be working in recruiting and they're just out there doing their jobs, but they're putting out a lot of great and inspiring content where I think if we work together under the DoD umbrella, that could be a way to drive the recruiting numbers and bring them up where before it was sort of, well, that's what they're doing and recruiters are over here and we don't want to mix each other up. But I think if you look to the people in the service right now, those who are putting out content and showing positive experiences with their military career, and they're actually single-handedly recruiting people. And so it's not the official approved talking points that come down from your higher headquarters public affairs office. But if you can work together hand in hand, I think you can really make a dent in that space. And so I see it a lot out there, and just curating the people who are really attracting that top talent and engagement, I think is really a way that the recruiting efforts can, if they can move into that direction and work together, I think that they'll be able to recruit top talent.
They really can. And the Parade Deck was an amazing place. We got to watch you from the Military Influencer Conference, since we weren't able to make it there in person this year. We were there last year when they, and that's where we had discovered the Parade Deck and all these amazing creators from MPs to yeomen on the Army, Marine Corps, and Navy side, sitting here, joining together in an effort to tell their journey and work towards change for a better future, because each generation has its own motivation for joining the military, reasons for getting out, and opportunities following, and it's crazy how technology kind of aids that along. What had inspired you to join the Marine Corps in the first place and get into combat camera?
Well, I was born and raised in Northern California, just north of San Francisco, in a place called Santa Rosa, California. It was very sort of rural. My grandparents, though, were in the military, so I spent a lot of time with them growing up, and I always heard about their stories. My grandfather was a Marine, Amtracker, an officer, and my grandmother was an Army nurse and an officer. And they, during the World War II, during the war, they were overseas in the Pacific and the island of Guam and Saipan, as the story goes, where they met. So my grandmother was there attending to the injured. And my grandfather was there doing island hopping campaigns. And after the war, somehow without Facebook or, social media, they connected and got married and had 6 kids. And my dad was number 4. And so I just grew up in the backdrop, too, of Fleet Week, San Francisco, which was very patriotic and inspiring. My dad would always take me. I'd see Marines walking down Broadway. I said, that's what I want to do. I want to be that. I want to be whatever that is. I want to be in the Marine Corps. And so back then, women weren't necessarily allowed to. They could be an admin, but I really knew from an early age that I wanted to be the one to tell the stories. And I'm a people person, and I love bridging the gap between the community and the military. And of course, in the early 80s, it was just sort of in the aftermath of Vietnam. I was aware of what had happened. And so I thought if I could just get the community to understand the veterans a little bit more. Of course, movies like Platoon, Apocalypse Now, all those movies that influenced and shaped our impression of the military. Even Private Benjamin, maybe you remember that, starring Goldie Hawn, where she joined the Army. Major Dad, so some of these TV and movies, you realize they do have an influence on our young people. So when you see that on TV and then you see it in real life, in person, Marines walking down the street, and you say, I don't care. That's what I want to be. So that was the job that I got. Luckily, I got the job I wanted. I took an English diagnostic test and a typing test back then and got accepted. And so from there, my first duty station was Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, where I was working at the radio and television station. And you may recall, if you're old enough to remember, and your listeners, the Cuban and Haitian crisis, where the Cubans and the Haitians decided they wanted to come to America. And this was in 94, 95 timeframe. So we had this mass influx of migrants just getting on a raft and trying to come to America. So we picked them up, 70,000 people. We picked them up, brought them to Guantanamo Bay. It was a tiny little base, meant for about 4,000 people, service members and their families. And now we've got 70,000 migrants in 10 cities everywhere. The high school, the gym, the golf course turned into a tent city. So that to me, and I was out covering stories, and it became a joint task force. So early on in my career, I learned what a NEO was, a non-combatant evacuation operation, what a joint task force was. I was thoroughly involved, covering those stories, reporting back to the States, taking pictures, doing radio, television. So I lucked out. And I just from there caught this epic wave of more deployments and more overseas engagements. And so that was really a great stepping off point for me to learn firsthand what the formation of a joint task force and some really good journalism, interview skills, and interviewing everyone from the chief of naval operations on down, senators, congressmen who came to visit us in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and interacting with media too. So I was very lucky in my timing of joining the Marine Corps. And I was older. I was 22 actually when I joined. So I felt older, but I barely graduated high school. I was not a very good student. And then my parents were like, just try to go to college first. If you don't like it, then join the Marines. And sure enough, after Desert Shield, Desert Storm, 91, 92, I was like, I need to be there. I need to be deployed. I need to be going overseas. And so then I got into the got recruited, and then ended up joining at the age of 22. So I was older. I felt older, but it was the right time for me.
It's wild when 22 can feel old when you actually like surpass that and live twice that long. Because you're just like, oh, I was just a baby.
Exactly. I love the boot camp experience. Being older, there's 18, 19-year-old kids, barely adults, who were first time away from home. And so me and a few other women in the women training for women Marines, were a little bit older and able to help the younger ones just kind of mentally, physically cope with the boot camp experience. So it was a great experience for me. And so, it wasn't necessarily physically hard. I played sports in high school. So that team coaching dynamic was really easy for me to kind of fall into place.
That's really incredible, because it's such a dynamic time to join the military in between wars, major conflicts. Even I can't imagine what it's like to join the service at this stage, following the GWAT era, and I definitely can't imagine doing the transition that you did from the Marine Corps into Naval Reserves. How did that transition go? How did you manage that, especially because GWAT was still going on and you seem to love the work that you do?
Well, I'll tell you. So I did my first 8 years of active duty in the Marine Corps, and I felt that I was on a great path to go to. I got left active duty, but stayed in the reserves and started college because I really felt like I needed to finish college. And that, sure enough, that was in 2001, and then 9/11 happened. And so everything changed. I mean, I was going to go and be the next Barbara Walters. So I was on my way I was working in TV as a reporter. I really wanted to be that next Barbara Walters or Christiane Amanpour. I was just seeking that sort of career path. And 9/11 happened. My career changed because I got mobilized right away. I was still in the reserves. Got mobilized, went to Afghanistan in the early days, 2002. And so from that point on, in between deployments, I managed to finish my bachelor's degree and my master's degree. But I was working for a colonel at the time. He's like, Amy, you've already graduated with your master's. Why don't you apply to this Navy direct commissioning program? And I thought, oh, I love the Marine Corps. No way. And he's like, just put in an application and see where it takes you. And so sure enough, I got selected. And in 2010 is when I transferred over to the Navy. And it really was the best decision I ever made, because it expanded my network of people and opportunities. The Navy had so many more opportunities for me to deploy, lead service members, and really contribute at a higher level and a more engaged level than I was. And I was a staff sergeant in the Marines and looking at gunny, and I had already deployed twice to Iraq. So 2 year-long tours, once in 2006 and then again in 2008, because I went back to Anbar with the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. And so I'd kind of tapped out. I had pretty much done everything I'd wanted to do in the Marine Corps, went to all the schools, did everything. It was just on repeat. So with the Navy opportunity, it just really expanded my horizons, met so many great people. And so no regrets whatsoever. And so I still continue to deploy, because from there in 2010, I got mobilized, went to Afghanistan twice with the Navy, and then some other pop-up opportunities to serve overseas. So I'm just so grateful for those opportunities to continue my career. It kind of re-energized me and more inspired, and opportunities within the Navy.
I'm super curious because you joined in 93. You did a fantastic job learning the field. You discovered, I really love journalism. And then you stayed in the reserves in order to help fund the education and stay connected, growing your work. And I hear a lot of young people, people that are, finishing high school, going through college, especially when I went back as a 30-year-old, people would always ask me about, hey, should I join the reserves or should I join the military to help me pay for college or to help me get to the next aspect of my career? And one of the things that I always tell them, I was like, you have to be willing to count the cost of what this means in your life. What was what advice would you give to someone, because you kind of lived that experience, is, a war struck up right when you were making your career transition in the early 2000s.
Yeah, I was driven by the opportunities to go forward and deploy, because without that, it can be kind of boring or the doldrums. But people reach out to me all the time and say, I want to go to college. I want this to be paid for, and I want to wear the uniform. But then when it comes time and you get mobilized, or you get the opportunities, or you get tagged for MOB, nobody wants to hear, hey, you got tagged for a MOB, when you really don't want to. And then they're like, I didn't want to, I really wasn't here for the mobilization. I was just here for the uniform and the money and the prestige or whatever, to be able to say you wore a uniform. So people really have to look inside their soul and say, can I do this? Is this something I want to do? And am I willing to give up my job or put it on hold so I can be mobilized? Because people are facing mobilizations continuously now, whether it's to Europe, to Asia, Indo-PACOM. There's always going to be a MOB. Now, the presidential recalls are a little different, where you don't have a choice, basically. And a couple of those were my situation. They're like, this is not optional for you. You are getting mobilized. And so if you want to be in the program and you have to participate in the program, you really have to ask yourself, am I willing to go all the way, risk everything, put boots on the ground? And you kind of have to have that conversation with yourself and your family. And so the reserves is a great way to pay for school. It's a great side hustle, if you will, extra money, get to go do some cool things. But when the balloon goes up, as they say, when you get that call, are you really ready to go in your mind? Are you spiritually, emotionally, physically ready for those mobilizations or those deployments? So it's a tough decision, because right now you just never know at a moment's notice what they're going to call you for. Especially working in public affairs, people are getting mobilized all the time to come and support and augment the active duty, because the active duty are stretched so thin. But any little pop-up or humanitarian disaster or crisis like Red Hill or something that goes on, they're calling public affairs. They're saying, we need you. Who can go? And so I've had a few of those great opportunities, to go to places like Sri Lanka or Romania or Poland for, a 60, 90 day deployment, or even a 6 month, 8 month, 9 month deployment. So I've had some really great opportunities and taken advantage of that. So some were not fun or hard, or that they were hard, like Iraq and Afghanistan. But then there's also the trade-off where I got to do a 6 month deployment to Poland, which was great. So I kind of have to think through long and hard about what your priorities are and how and where you can serve.
Yeah, there's so much opportunity inside military life, but you never know what it's like until you're living it, to be called by the nation. And with the stories that you tell, you have a book that we were discussing a little bit earlier, very, very lightly touched upon, called Heroes Live Here. And it's about these people that did answer the call. Would you mind sharing a little bit about the inspiration behind the book and what you hope readers take away from it?
Well, thank you. It was a passion project, really, for me. I was the last person to expect to write a book. I mean, really, I tell stories, but I always thought when you put the word author behind your name, like that was special. That was someone else, not me. But Camp Pendleton, Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton in San Diego County, is just a very special place. I was stationed there for many years, and it's where I deployed from there on several occasions. And so after the dust settled, really after the combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, I came to work there as a civilian, and I noticed that there was a lot of tributes to Marines and sailors and troops from there through the years. And I was driving to work back and forth to work every day during COVID. And I thought, let me go see this memorial. Let me go check that out. I wanted to just pay my respects and see what memorials had been popped up from the year 2001 or 2002, really, to present day. And so I started taking photos and sharing with Gold Star families and fellow Marines who no longer live in the area. And I thought, how best can I put this together and tell the story of a place that we know and love at Camp Pendleton? And that's how I came about the book. I just started adding my photos, and I had contributions from Marines that I served with who also had served there, and just called it home for many years. And so that's where I came up with the book. And so it's exceeded all my expectations because people are very genuinely curious about Camp Pendleton and then the stories that came from there. And in my research, I learned that more Marines from Camp Pendleton were killed or injured, killed especially, from 2002 to 2021. So during the wars of Iraq and Afghanistan, more than from there than any other one base or station in America. And so that's been a heavy burden for the country and for this community in particular near Oceanside and South Orange County and San Clemente and Fallbrook and Vista, that troops from there were killed. From the very first troops that were killed in Afghanistan in 2002 were based at Camp Pendleton, and then the very last. So if you remember, in August 2021, within minutes of learning that the Marines who were at the Abbey Gate in Kabul and Afghanistan were killed, within minutes, tributes, flowers, photos, memorabilia were placed at the front gate of Camp Pendleton because they were based there. And so 10 troops, 9 Marines, 1 Navy sailor was from a unit on Camp Pendleton. And so it was a bookend. The book was actually at the printers. I had to pull it back and say, we've got to write that final chapter, because that just tells the story of the dedication through the 20-year span after 9/11. The first troops, the 15th Marine Expeditionary Force, was in Australia. They were on Liberty. They all got recalled, went over, set sail, went to Afghanistan, put boots on the ground, were working during combat operations there, those early days after 9/11. And so being able to capture that all in a book has been really just an honor of really a capstone project, really, from my own experiences. So a lot of my photos from Iraq and Afghanistan were also included in the book. And so that's how that came to be. And so I just love telling the stories of our fallen troops and names you've probably heard of, like Megan McClung, Doug Zembiak, Travis Mannion. All of these Marines were all from Camp Pendleton, and they stepped off from Camp Pendleton in different eras, and they maybe didn't know each other, but I'm able to capture their story, and so their families can feel some closure and some comfort that we remember their service and sacrifice at a special place here in California.
That's absolutely beautiful. I have chicken skin as you're talking about it, because we talk about, or I at least talk about, public affairs and photography and videography as a creative realm. And it really is. I mean, to write, to create a story, even a non-fictional one, is still a creative endeavor. But it's also such a healing part of life, because history is going to continue to move on. And I mean, I've lived here in Hawaii for the last 20 years. I'm 5 minutes still from the Marine Corps base that I got stationed on in 2004 and left in 2011. I remember the service members that were there. I have pictures of some of them. My Marines and sailors share photos annually of their losses and their tragedies. And if somebody wasn't there to capture their story and capture their likeness and their imagery, because this base has completely transformed. The barracks are no longer there. Some of our people have even just said, like, one of the oldest barracks in the Marine Corps, the fabled Mackey Hall, is now decommissioned. Nobody's living there. And Pendleton goes through very similar changes. Every base across this country does. And so, units get decommissioned. but the stories do need to live on for healing and recovery to carry on, at least from my personal experience and when I talk with others. What role do you think these creative outlets play in your healing, recovery, and coping, especially with an event like the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was so hard for many of our service members and veterans?
Well, because Camp Pendleton is home to about 50,000 troops, and it's such a high turnover, like all military bases, people are coming and going, the rotations are just nonstop, is that there are only, a handful of people that have that institutional knowledge and say, I remember that old building and that old building, and did you know that this was home to X, Y, and Z. And so with Camp Pendleton, the history there is a historian, but there are some of us there that have been telling the stories of the Marines and the history of the actual land, just a handful of us. And so to help communicate that better to the community, because the training that goes on in Camp Pendleton, you can hear the helicopters and you hear the explosions and you're not really sure what's going on. It can be annoying to people who are new to the area, but we try to reassure them that it's just routine training and to help build a community of support around the base. That community wants to know what is the legacy of the base and what are the Marines doing over there. And so to bridge that gap through book, through storytelling, through community outreach. And so I love that the base commanding general has a copy of my book. And he says, Amy, anytime I want to know the history of the base, he goes to the book as it's chronicled, and then he can relay that when he does his public remarks or delivers speeches. He uses my book as a reference point because it's home to long before it was a base, it was a working cattle ranch, and there's an old ranch house with on the base that the Marine Corps preserves, but it was home to Pio Pico, which was the last Spanish governor of Alta California before California it was under the rule of Spain, then Mexico, and then it became part of the United States. So the house is preserved there. It's a 200-year-old home. And so being able to work around that, but preserve the legacy even before it became a military installation, and telling the story about Joseph Pendleton, who was a Marine general who fought all over the world and then retired in San Diego, became mayor of Coronado, but died just a few months before the base was named in his honor. And so telling some of that history, people in the surrounding communities just want to know more. There's people like you and me that can relay that information. And so I just love to be able to kind of be that intermediary piece to help bridge the generation gap, because also the young Marines that live there now, they drive by the ranch house or they drive by the Santa Margarita River and don't really know the historical significance, where there's Native Americans that were there for 10,000 years living off the Santa Margarita River, and they drive by it every day and may not know the history. So I do bring the book to life with the photos and the stories of the Marines of the 20 years, but I also talk about the history of the land and how the Marine Corps has adopted the land and really done its best to preserve the land for the environment, the animals that live there, and it's a buffer zone between San Diego County and Orange County and LA, so that there's 125,000 square acres of preserved land there that we're very proud that has not been developed.
It's an absolutely incredible place. I had only done training on there for about 6 or 8 weeks when I was going through field med back in 2004. And I'm so glad that there are people like yourself that are working to preserve the history as well as share the memories, and the work that the military really does try to do, because we try to be a part of any community that we're stationed amongst, whether it's overseas or CONUS locally in the States.
That's right. So did you go through the Devil Dock University at Camp Del Mar?
I'm not sure what it was called. It was at the time it was Field Medical Service School, but yeah, it was at Del Mar. I forget how long it was because it's just so long ago.
FMSS, otherwise known as Devil Dock University. So yes, right there in Del Mar, and they have a new building, but that legacy there. It's been home to the Devil Dock University, or our Greenside Corpsmen, right, for many years. And so Camp Del Mar is transformed completely. You wouldn't recognize it, but what people do remember the beach, and they have preserved the beach and maintained that for a beautiful place for military families to come and enjoy.
That's absolutely incredible. I do want to talk about something that I know a lot of service members, veterans, and just our civilian listeners have some thoughts and ideas about how mental health affects our service members and veterans, and what the military does to aid in providing necessary care. Are there any misconceptions about mental health that you experience doing the work that you do? And what do you think we could do to help bridge that gap so we can get the appropriate resources into the hands of the people that need it?
Well, I'm proud to have partnered with the American Legion, and I host a podcast called Be the One. It's under the Tango Alpha Lima umbrella, where we're talking about really preventing veteran suicide and talking with scientists, doctors, experienced people who mental health backgrounds, medical, psychiatric. And so I feel that what's emerging, what's on the tip of really exploding right now is alternative modalities, alternative therapies, such as, the psychedelics. I've interviewed many people on this topic, and the VA and other large organizations are starting to adopt it or explore it, but they're just not ready to go all in with the research. And so I feel like there are some veterans out there who have actually taken it upon themselves or sought out treatments for alternative modalities, such as ayahuasca, ibogaine, and some other treatments. You may be hearing those words in the near future more frequently and with more acceptance. But I think that now's the time to really get on board with that. I think that those are some misconceptions about, we've grown up thinking that these, I want to say, medicines or drugs have been against the law, outlawed, not accepted in the mainstream. But what people are telling me is that they're really getting good results from it. And so from people who suffer from PTSD or trauma, that they've tried it and they really are speaking highly of it, or it's worked for them. And so if the VA and other organizations who are on the fence or not sure or still waiting for more research, but now is the time to really move forward, I think we can make great progress if we talk about it more and it becomes more mainstream. Have you heard the same thing, or have you heard more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a part of several, virtual veteran groups. With what we do on this podcast, I myself am a suicide attempt survivor several times over. I still struggle with depression. I still have my PTSD moments, and I currently live medication free. And it wasn't because I went through other modalities. This has been a very, very hard and soul searching road to make sure that I can do this in line with the values that I hold. But when I talk to other people about their experiences, sometimes I get a bit envious because they've had such amazing experiences with it. Myself, when I began my treatment process back in 2011, I went through an alcohol rehabilitation clinic that has just kind of turned me off of external substances. But when I hear, like I said, when I hear others talk about it, I'm really impressed, and I want to continue to see the research happen. I want to continue to hear people like you champion for this stuff and talk to experts on, platforms like your podcast, with the backing of the veteran organizations. When I think about mental health and the amount of resources our country is putting towards it, the amount of resources our current military is trying to do to solve the problems of these increasing and continuous suicide rates throughout throughout the world, no matter what base you're at. I'm really hopeful that a solution, a more permanent solution to these issues is going to be found, and it's going to bring more hope and healing to a new generation.
I do too. I have the most empathy for people who are suffering like that. It really, and it's not just the military too. There's, I think suicide actually has been omnipresent in all of our lives as kids. Even I remember very clearly in high school, I think there was 3 young boys, teenagers who I was classmates with who killed themselves. And it just kind of has always been with us. And so what can we do? So there's a lot of room in between, someone's ready to commit suicide, and then between thriving and all the way to suicide, there's people, all of us live somewhere in between there. And so I think we're going to open the aperture a little bit more of like, well, what are some ways to thrive? What are the things we need to be doing for our mental health here in America that we could adopt or learn more about? Even the teachings of the Stoics, or the positive outcomes of fitness and food, the connection between social media and what it does for our brains. And so I think that when you look at all of these things and we talk about it more and really accept that people are not well, more people are more not well. And so we just need to recognize what are ways to get outside of that. What inspiration can we draw from to help those people who are kind of on the far end of the spectrum, at the worst end, and then what are the people at the best end, and how do we talk about, well, what is it you want to know, and where are you, meet people where they are on the spectrum, and all the resources out there to help them, whether it's substance abuse, alcohol, family, finances, fitness, food, all of the things, and there's people standing by ready to help. And so how do we connect? Hey, I know this person, they can connect you with that. Or are they open to alternative therapies and modalities to experiment? And if you're at your wit's end, this might help. And for families out there who are supporting and sticking by the person who needs the help, we need to get them the support and as well. And so been able to connect with so many great people out there doing all kinds of different things. And hopefully, it could be as simple as like reduce the medications, like you mentioned, med-free. Well, how do we, so there's been some suicides that have been triggered by over medication because the VA overprescribed and didn't deconflict. And so something like that, we just need to start talking about it and get real, have some real conversations about how to get people the help they need. And that could be a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be meds. It can be a fitness routine, a food routine, learning teachings, or reading the Bible, or doing all kinds of a variety of things. Whatever people can find can be ways to improve mental health. Finding ways to survive, really, but how do we get on the spectrum of like really thriving in life? So there's plenty of ways out there.
Absolutely. That's part of my education effort here, is to teach people that this isn't just a veteran problem. This isn't just a military problem. This is a worldwide problem. In the States alone, 1 person dies every 11 seconds by suicide. 48% of Americans have been affected by somebody either dying by suicide or have attempted or thought about it themselves. That is every other person you meet, if we are looking at it statistically. And yet it's something we don't talk about. It's something we don't bring up in conversations as a society because it's uncomfortable. But this platform right here is a platform that I always want to provide our guests an opportunity to talk about it. And to share a message of hope, especially because these numbers continue and they continue to rise amongst our service members, veterans, first responders, and just members of the community. So, Amy, what message of hope would you have for somebody that is currently struggling with thoughts of suicide?
Well, whether you served or not, and whether or not you went to combat or not, the world is a tough place to be. And reframing your existence, understanding where you fit into the world. What has helped me is realizing that struggling through, a childhood. My parents were divorced. I grew up kind of bouncing around between all family members, and then joined the military and going to combat and experiencing such sadness and sorrow. I said, I'm not going down like that. I'm going to thrive. I am going to maximize my potential. And how do I get through day to day? What am I doing to help myself? What am I sharing? What am I experiencing? Those are the things that I think people need to really just take a deep breath, realize that, with all the ailments out there, with cancer, with car accidents, all the things that could go wrong in life. And here we are still alive. It is life after all. It's only life. Okay. So let's just look at it for what it is. Are you alive? Are you breathing? What can you do? Can you get out of bed? And you look at someone who is just really struggling to take their last breath, whether they're suffering from cancer or some other ailment, and they're struggling and they are inspired and they're going to fight it and they're going to give it everything they've got. Meanwhile, there are other people who are really struggling. And so how does someone fight for life so well at their very last core? They're going to fight to survive cancer diagnosis. And then you've got other people who are really struggling. And so finding a common ground, finding whatever works for you, I think is what people need to just sort of do a self-inventory. What are you eating? Who are you spending your time with? What are you watching on TV? All of these things can make or break a life, right? And so we're all, Martin Luther King Jr. had a saying, we may have all come from different places, but we're all in the same boat now together. So we're all rowing together. And so there's so many resources, with so many resources out there. Please find the resources that work for you so you can be an inspiration to other people. And we all have bad days, but it doesn't mean it's a bad life. So I appreciate the opportunity to share that with you today. Join us on the American Legion journey. Be the one. I can be the one. You can be the one to help another veteran. And so people who are feeling isolated right now, people who are not connected, there's so many great connection points out there for fellow veterans and family members. And so I encourage you to find your tribe and get connected, write a book, go talk to kids. I always feel so more inspired when I talk to young kids and their funny sayings, whether it's teenagers or little ones. And so you can't not help that when you're around kids to feel so inspired and to come away feeling like, okay, we're going to pass the torch to them. They're going to be here on this earth a lot longer than us. So let's give them everything we can to survive and thrive.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And in addition to the American Legion podcast, where can people find and connect with you and hopefully add you as a member of their tribe?
Yes, I love it. I do love to connect on LinkedIn, so people can find me on LinkedIn. That's where I spend most of my time. My website called heroeslivehere.com. I put together something recently called Amy's A-List. And what I like to do is share all of the veteran-sponsored events, veteran-affiliated events, nonprofit organizations, and just push out their information about where people can either come and support or volunteer or participate, or there's everything from, if you like to golf, there's veteran golfing, there's people who like to get together and go for dog walks and cooking, dancing, there's a group here in San Diego called the Dancing Veterans of San Diego. And so it was like ballroom dancing, learn to salsa, different styles. So whatever it is that you're into, find your group. And if you can give back, you can give back. But you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, but LinkedIn is really my preferred platform. So I look forward to connecting with you guys out there and following your journey. And if there's any tips or tricks on public speaking, communicating, getting linked up with your veteran groups in your hometown, there's ways that we can do that, and I can help you with that.
Well, that's absolutely amazing. Amy, thank you so much for your time here, and thank you for joining us on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for all that you're doing to bring this to light and share your own story. It takes a really courageous person to get out there and put yourself out there and share your personal story. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, remember to stop your Strava walk. And if you haven't joined our Strava walking group, 1 Mile, 1 Veteran, that's a great place to connect with others that are starting this journey or have been on it for some time. And also remember, you can catch the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast on Reese Across America Radio, available for you on platforms like iHeartRadio, Odyssey, and the TuneIn app.